Welcome back. All right, I want to talk a little bit about Seattle. We're a little over a month away from the expansion draft. I'd love to do an expansion. Here's Seattle 2.0 because they did a Seattle expansion draft already months and months and months ago, and it would be quite different if I did it now. But I get through it and I look at it and I think, well, those might be the players available. How does Ron Francis play this? When Vegas came in 4 years ago, there was some debate about whether or not they might take on, say, a Bobby Ryan contract. Right, Bobby Ryan's contract in Ottawa wasn't really all that attractive, but maybe Vegas would be looking for a goal scorer because goal scoring is always what's difficult to find when you're doing an expansion draft. Right, Vegas somehow came out of that very, very well. Good advanced scouting, great pro scouting, and Seattle's been doing a lot of scouting as well this year. A lot of pro scouting being done by them. So they're not going into this blind. They're going to have access to some pretty good players. They're going to have access to some pretty good players because if I'm a general manager right now, so the other thing when I'm going through and making these lists is, why am I protecting a guy that's making $8 or $9 million? If I'm David Poyle, why do I protect Duchesne or Johansson? If I can get Seattle to take that money off my hands, that's a win for me because I haven't given them anything to take them off my hands, and now I've got $8 or $9 million that I can use to maybe improve other parts of the team, right? And so that's the tricky part right now. It's sort of like last year I was looking at the TJ Oshie contract as a good example of one that doesn't age very well, and if Washington could move that, it might be beneficial to them later because Oshie's getting older, and at some point things are going to start, going downhill for him offensively, and yet when I look at it now, that contract's fine comparatively speaking with some of the other ones that I think teams would be desperate to try to get rid of. But if you're Seattle, how do you approach this expansion draft? That's the other thing that I was dealing with, where I'm looking at these lists and I'm going, okay, I can get PK Subban, right? Let's say New Jersey doesn't protect Subban. They go, that's $9 million. If we can save it, we save it, right? Because again, a lot of teams are in cap hell, and if New Jersey, let's say somebody takes Subban, now if I'm Tom Fitzgerald, I can call up other teams and go, hey, we just freed up $9 million in cap space. How much is it worth it to you to free up some cap space on your team? We'll take that bad contract from you. You might have to give up a couple first round picks, but you'll be able to free yourself up. And Jim Benning goes, sounds good. So this is why it's more complicated this year than in 2017. And this is why when people say, well, Seattle won't get a team as good as Vegas, not the same way that Vegas did, no. They don't have to. They don't have to make all these deals before the expansion draft at all. They can sit on their hands, not pick up the phone at all, and create more chaos that way than if they pick up the phone and say, hey, so we'll take that Duchesne contract off your hands if you throw in a second. It makes no sense for Ron Francis at all to pick up contracts beyond what he needs to meet the cap minimum. So when I'm doing these expansion drafts, I look at the cap minimum. I don't worry about the max. I'm going, okay, what's the minimum I have to spend? $48.9 million. All right, let's get to that number. And if I can stay above that number, but leave myself about $25-30 million in cap space, I can then go out into the unrestricted free agent market and pick some guys up. I can call teams that are having cap problems and say, hey, so the UFA market, they said no to me, but I noticed you got those contracts there you don't like. And so this is where things have changed from where we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the future was bright and sunshiny, and the cap kept going up, and everybody's singing Kumbaya, and players are throwing money in the air. And now if they throw the money in the air, only 70% of it comes back to them. The other 30% goes into escrow. It's something like that. So that's where we're at. Is that now we're in this situation where economically the NHL has been kind of losing money over the last 16, 17 months, right? So Seattle comes in, having spent their $650 million to have a team. The protected lists come out on July 17th. So teams are going to protect players. The other thing that I find interesting is, and I agree, well, don't protect that guy. He's a UFA this year. Right. But what's weird to me is when people are saying, don't protect that guy. He's a UFA this year. And then after the expansion draft, then they can look to re-sign him. Okay, but Once that list comes out, those are 4 days between the protected lists and the expansion draft for Ron Francis to pick up that phone and call that guy you're not signing to extension and say, hey, so they didn't think you were worthy of an extension, right? So we're thinking, I don't know, 5 years, $5 million per. How does that sound? And depending on the player on the other end, he might go, you know what? I was going to return to that team. I had actually talked to them, but that's a really good deal. That's actually better than what they're offering me. So, yeah, I'll sign that. So they sign him to a deal, and this is where the expansion draft's different too. You have to sign of the players that they draft, the 30 players they draft, 20 of them have to have a contract for next season. That's where these 4 days are really important. Francis can sit down and make sure that all 30 players he's picking up are signed next season. When I'm doing this, I always try to make sure that I'm picking up a bunch of guys who are probably restricted free agents this year or have one more year left on their contract. So restricted free agents, it's easier to send them that qualifying offer and maybe negotiate with them over that 4 days on what they want, especially again in this current economic environment. But again, if you can save that money, you can trade with a flat cap. You can get really good deals out of GMs that will look different than what Vegas got. Vegas's deals were mostly about, if we give you this guy, you won't take this guy. And George McPhee said fine. And he gets that player, whether it was Shea Theodore, whether it was Alex Tuck, whether it was, getting William Karlsson in exchange for not taking somebody else. He gets these guys that are pretty good players now and are key players for the Vegas Golden Knights. Here, if you take Marcia, so make sure you take Smith with him. Oh, okay. So, you sure about that? Yeah. Unless you want us to throw an Ekblad. That seems like it'd be a bit of an overpayment. So I'm going to say no. You hang up. Oh, I could have got Ekblad. But yeah, so he can trade now. Again, it'll be different trades. Because now it's going to be, we don't have any cap space. We want to improve our team. We need to get rid of these contracts. Which player do you like? And maybe for Ron Francis, he picks somebody who's actually on a decent contract. So it gets interesting looking at some of these teams because, again, I think for Seattle, I think they'll look to get younger guys. I don't think the expansion draft is going to be all about populating their team with the guys who are going to be the starting roster. So when you go through, and again, it's through Cap Friendly, right? CapFriendly.com, they have the Seattle expansion tool. And you could build the team with veterans, sure. You could be ridiculous and say you're not going to protect Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby and go, this is easy. But yeah, the flat cap is really going to complicate things for every other team in the league. And Seattle's kind of the out. Seattle's going to be the out for a couple of GMs. It means Seattle picks up 2022 draft picks, is my guess. Seattle likely picks up a few 2021 draft picks, although I don't think they'll have the same value as the 2022 draft picks. And I think they're going to be in on some unrestricted free agents as well. I do expect to be underwhelmed somewhat on expansion day. I do expect that on July 21st, when they bring these guys out in these sharp Seattle jerseys, that our reaction is going to be, well, I don't even know if that team can pull themselves out of the cellar in the Pacific. It may be a team of younger players. There may be a few unknowns in there. When Vegas made their picks, not all of them were household names. And Connor Brickley, anybody. So, yeah, it's possible that Seattle has an approach that's even more towards the young, towards maybe some more of the inexperienced. And again, it's about get over that cap minimum and then negotiate from there. Make sure you've got your goaltenders. And again, leave yourself lots of cap space because guys are going to get bought out. It's going to be a good market. And you can probably improve your team a lot in between that expansion draft July 21st and the start of the season. Seattle is in an enviable position. And this is why when people say, well, they're not going to be as good as Vegas. No. Agreed. But they're going to be pretty darn good if Francis plays this right. You only get one chance. The one thing that Seattle needs to avoid that I think happened with Vegas, and I think it was because the expectations went up, Vegas immediately spent to the cap. And I've never understood why Vegas didn't try to make sure that they always had the cap space to make those additions. We saw how that cost them in the regular season this year where they couldn't ice a full lineup because they were over the cap at certain times. So Seattle, I think that would be the one thing you want to avoid. You want to avoid bloated contracts. You want to avoid being at the cap. You want to make sure you've got space. Because one thing for Seattle too is, so you get your team, you've got everything set up, you brought in a couple of free agents. I think it's important for Francis to make sure he's got some cap space there so that if at the trade deadline things aren't going swimmingly in Seattle and maybe they're not going to make the playoffs, then he can make a deal at the deadline where he picks up some money, and in exchange for taking money off the hands of another team, say, I don't know, like Vegas, like Colorado, whoever, that they're adding more prospects and or draft picks in return. If this is handled right, Seattle can be pretty good right out of the gate. The teams I've been able to put together for them have not been stellar. But again, I'm always trying to make sure I've got a lot of cap space. So I'm not going to take a Duchesne contract. I'm not going to take a Subban contract. I don't take on Holtby either. With Vancouver, the question mark I have with Vancouver is whether or not they protect Ulevy, whether or not Seattle, with their, again, professional scouts, might look at the advanced numbers for Ulevy and say, you know what, this guy might be a decent defenseman. Maybe they take him. Maybe they take Gadjevic. Maybe they take Tyler Mott, because by my estimation, Mott would not be one of the protected for the Canucks. But that's what we'll find out on July 17th. Which players do general managers prioritize protecting, and which ones do they not? And which unrestricted free agent that they're like, well, we'll get him back because I'm not going to protect him because he's going to re-sign after expansion. Do they wake up on July 22nd and say, wait, he went where? He's in Seattle, but we had an agreement. We'll see how it works out. All right, so there you go. What are you guys excited about when it comes to the whole Seattle team being created in about a month's time? I apologize that there's not a whole bunch of names on the board. But again, when I went through and I made my team, I went, this isn't going to be the team. And if I put that up there, people are going to be like, well, that's a terrible team, which is true. It's not a very good team. But again, I'm looking at the UFA market. I'm looking at the flat cap and going, hey, I don't want to do any teams any favors, not for free. And so there are some contracts that may very well end up in Seattle to put them closer to the cap if they're getting back the right package in return, which might involve young prospects and that kind of thing. It's going to be an interesting month. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And again, have fun with it, because odds are this is the last expansion for the NHL. All indications are that once they've hit 32 teams, that's it. We won't see another expansion. The only way that we would see any new cities involved would be if a team moves, and there doesn't seem to be any of that on the horizon either. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.